Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are going to do a quick talk here, not as technical as the previous ones, on expertise isn't all you need. Building an AI red team. As Rob mentioned, my name is George Orchias, and I'm a senior director here at Verizon, also a SANS principal instructor and co-author of Security 565, which is Red Team Operations and Adversary Emulation, which now has a cert, the GRTP. And with me, I have Tim Schultz, who I had the pleasure of work with at Scythe. I actually met him at the SANS Purple Team Summit, the first one ever, when he was over at MITRE giving a talk there, and he's joining me here. But we have a ton of content, so we're going to get right to it. We're going to start with a story. So as Rob mentioned, did a lot of time at Citigroup, about 10 years there, 3 years at Scythe, and then decided to go back to corporate. So I start in a new company, and I got a pretty cool job, got a cool team, thanks to my boss, Ali, that gave the name, and that is the Readiness and Proactive Security Team, where I'm running vulnerability management under a guy named Vinny, awesome team, the pen test team, the what we'll now call Enterprise Red Team, right? Your traditional red team, a dedicated purple team. If you know me, I love purple, and now an AI red team. But wait, how's that different? How's that different than a regular red team? Wait, we're getting ahead of ourselves. All right, let's start over. I start over in a new company, and what do you do when you join a new company? Well, you need to build some trust and some reputation. So I'm going to give one example of something the red team did that kind of did this, and we cover some of this stuff in the red team operations and adversary emulation course if you're interested in that stuff. So seeing what was going on out on the world, some real attacks, attacking CI/CD pipelines. And we're like, hey, let's take a look at what we can do here in Verizon. Can we get to a point where we can commit code and maybe get it out onto a product or something? So we put our red team on it. They start working. They find these Jenkins servers that are getting migrated. And it had a plugin in it, a plugin that facilitates the migration of projects from one Jenkins instance to another. They exploited this vulnerability. They ended up getting over 7,000 credentials. Score, done, right? No, not yet. Not done. But awesome finding. You already exploited it. We're going to pause. The red team looked at me and was like, what do you mean we're pausing? We got all these credentials. We got to go. I'm like, calm down. Great find. But listen, you already exploited the vulnerability. Let's go. Let's report this. Let's get that vulnerability fixed. And of course, try to fix all those accounts, do rotations and all that of the passwords. And then you continue, but they're, oh, you're going to slow me down. I'm like, listen, we got to work together here. We're doing impact. So they ended up doing that. At the end of the day, I think they realized that it was for the best case scenario. We got all this good press that, look, we found this vulnerability. We exploited it. We fixed it, and no other malicious attackers did it. And now we can continue on. So, little example of building trust and reputation once you get somewhere as far as red teaming goes. So then Gen AI comes out, right? Seth mentioned it, others mentioned it, right? November 2022, everyone remembers, right? We actually did a webcast with SANS. I did a talk with Rob and Ed Scotus and a few others on how to use Gen AI for offensive purposes. The recordings out there. But Gen AI isn't new. And I'm new to this company. So what do you need to do? You need to understand the current landscape. If you're a red teamer, situational awareness, right? Like understand what is going on in your environment. And at Verizon, AI isn't new. There's actually, and has been, a VP of artificial intelligence and data. There's a whole team for this already. So you can't just come in like, oh, I'm cybersecurity, I'm going to take over this. And we actually have some pretty cool stuff. I'm going to show you one of the things that was built in Verizon even before my time. It's the first time anyone's going to see this out in public. I did go through 1 million approvals to make this happen, but Verizon actually built a inventory system. You all know the SANS and the CIS critical control, right? Number one, have an inventory of what you have. Well, they built NGRAN, Enterprise Governance Registry for Administration of Models. And you can actually see a screenshot. There's a real screenshot. I had to block some things out to get it approved, but we actually have a way to inventory. use cases of AI. You go in, how do you want to use this? And it has like a risk rubric that tells you, what the risk is depending on how you're going to use that use case, as well as a inventory of all the different models that we have and that are approved and you can actually use. So if you are just getting started in this area in your organization, this is step one, right? Like you need an inventory. You need to know what to do. I'm not saying build some custom app, but at least start with, the #1 InfoSec tool in the world, Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, right? So we already are doing some of this. What is new? Well, Gen AI came out, ChatGPT, everyone's talking about it. Now cybersecurity folks are getting into it. Identify what your management wants to know. Start providing summaries of things coming out. Start reading about these. Quick question, and first one to answer it on Slack, I will buy you the $25 Humble books. I think it's a bunch of books on AI. This talk title is a play on words for which paper that came out. This talk title is a play on words on a paper. Some of you may have read it. Whoever puts it in Slack, I'll check that after I'm done talking. I'll get you those books. So you have to be on top of this stuff, right? Bunch of things coming out so quickly, it is impossible to keep doing it. Chris Peacock, stop slacking me. I think people can hear it. So what do? We read these papers and we then create summaries, exec summaries. This is how this impacts us. If it's a new attack vector, new areas to look at, and then you put them all and you do marketing. This is my Steve Ballmer moment, right? You go out and you speak about this in your organization. You share this net new. Your CISO and your directors and senior management are not reading all these papers. They are not going to know or have the time to go through all that. You go and do that. You go and speak at your CISO all hands call or the cyber hour or the trainings or the ops review, wherever you can, to show that one, you're interested in this, and two, that you're going to bring value to the organization. Remember, that's what offensive security is all about, is bringing value to the organization by hopefully lowering the risk. So, of course, we now have done a whole bunch of noise. People now know that we want to do some AI red teaming, and we start getting questions about evaluating various different things. So, of course, you can go out there. There's a few companies out there that are starting to do some of these assessments. Not very much. Feel free to ping me. I have a very small list. Or you can build an AI red team internally. Or why not do both? We kind of do that for red teaming, right? Even with an internal red team, we get an external red team to come once a year. Why not both? So as all this is coming in, I'm new. I'm working with the red team. I'm working with vulnerability management. I need someone. So one, put up a use case that I need to hire someone. And two, hire Tim. Oh, and Tim just showed up on the screen. He's here to help me. Tim, what happened next?
Same thing. Build trust and reputation. So I don't have quite as cool Jenkins like CI/CD pipeline use case to kick off things with. But as George mentioned, one of the first things you really need to do beyond, of course, building trust and reputation is gain that situational awareness. And as I think every speaker has alluded to today, there is a lot happening in AI security world, or just AI world in general. And so slide. And that is where we get to all of these things. Like every speaker's talked about it a little bit, where this field's moving so fast, right? If you put a slide together on just what's happened in the last week, we have Meta releasing new models. We have Microsoft releasing new models. A lot of that's been already touched on a little bit. There's shifting priorities, right? When we're talking about the security of things, it's what are those expectations of users? How are we meeting the business needs, that kind of thing. Or if you think about it, like 6 months ago, everyone was talking about hallucinations, right? And there's still mentions of them. It's something to know, but now we're moving on to AI agents. And so as a security practitioner, you have to sort of meet the field and your business folks where they're looking at things, what they're concerned about, because this is moving really quickly. Research papers are the name of the game when anything's being published. And something that we've really seen in like AI security world, and again, AI world in general, is the speed at which new research is being integrated into products and sort of hitting market is unlike anything we've ever seen. Like we're talking weeks to months at times, and that's something that is how quickly everything is cycling right now. And people are releasing new things, and now everyone builds off of it and keeps building the next and the next and the next thing. New companies are, of course, the result of some of this. We have lots of startups popping up. Like anytime someone from Meta or Google or any of those leaves, they're going to potentially found another company. You're going to see a big seed round, all of this other information that comes out about it. And one of the other really interesting things is expanded adversaries, right? This is something that I think a lot of folks don't necessarily think about. But like in cybersecurity, especially if you're coming from a cybersecurity background, you're like the threat actors a lot of times, right, are experts, right? They are red teamers. There are things like that. But when we talk about threats to AI models and AI systems, it's potentially anybody that views AI as something that is going to either cause like job displacement. That's one of the number one things that the general public is worried about. So you have these different things that have come out, right? Nightshade is an example of a tool that artists can use to data poison their own images before they upload them to something like Instagram. Again, trying to protect their own style and things like that. And so adversaries is probably it's a little bit of a term here that I think we've got to look at shifting because these things exist. But that's something that, as a security practitioner, you have to understand and think about all of these things. Regulations, right? This is something that, GRC and all of that has been an area where we're continuing, like this is evolving, right? The EU AI Act, whether it's the executive order, there's a lot of different things happening around the world. And especially for companies or enterprises that are like international, that this is something you're going to have to look at what all of these do. Responsible AI has been touched on a little bit. This is a team that has been working on these things for years, potentially. As security is now sort of a focus, it's really important not to just jump in and say, okay, we know everything about AI security now, or we'll figure it out. This is a team that has a ton of expertise that if you're in an organization, you need to partner with them if you have it, or it's another capability you might need to bring up. And then gets to the fun that everything's fast moving. There's no standard tests or tool sets. There's examples of things. There's open source products that have come out, but we're not really into the like build versus buy yet, right? If you are trying to get into this, if you're building models, if you're having to test those things to meet regulatory needs, you are going to have to build your own tools. And this gets to telemetry gaps, explainable AI, transparent AI, right? These are things that, the emergent capabilities that were mentioned at the end of the last talk by Seth. That's one of those things where there are things we don't understand about these systems, and we're in charge of securing them or making sure that we understand the risk. And so there's a lot of unknowns that is going to continue. And so that is an area that you're going to have to get used to as you wade into this. And then, of course, the last thing, everybody wants to use AI, right? Every tool, whether every business, like unit wants to use some form of generative AI, whether it's a feature in a product they already have, whether it's ChatGPT, all of those different things, and you are going to be the people that have to help them work through that. So one of the next big things is, what does an AI red team do, right? Everyone hears red team and thinks, oh yes, you're going to be doing all this hands-on keyboard attacking stuff, but that's not where you start. That's part of one of the first things to do is start a charter, right? Put something that you can get leadership buy-in on. And one of the big things that I did, this was my first week at Verizon, was put this together. And really it's about helping making data-driven decisions around AI risks and AI security. Sometimes this is going to involve doing a test. Other times it's going to be, hey, if this is moving quick enough, here is sort of the adversarial perspective. But at the end of the day, because this does have such a business driver associated with it, you're going to get overruled a lot. So that's something that you've got to understand is like, where is that business risk, and making sure that you're not trying to hold the line on something that you're going to lose every time. And this gets into what are these pitfalls that security practitioners can fall into, right? Because this is something we've come into. Data scientists, machine learning engineers have been left alone for like a decade, right, or more. And so they've sort of been off doing their thing, and now all of a sudden, Like the field's exploded. Everyone wants data scientists and people that know machine learning. But also now we have all these new processes. You have to register your use case. You have to register your models. All of these things that are to teams that a lot of them haven't had to necessarily do that in the past. So this is really where it's important to build bridges and come in not as someone that's trying to essentially give expertise in an area that is relatively new to most cybersecurity folks, but you need to work with the teams, see what they're doing, and figure out what are those wins that you can get over time. Because again, business drivers for AI mean that there's going to be lines that you're not going to be able to you will die on a lot of hills if you try and stand up to too many things. You have to be pragmatic and make sure that you've got an understanding of how the business is looking at it, because a cool attack and expecting people to care is not going to work. And so this is one of those things where you have to team. There's a ton of different expertise needed to test these things well. So you need all the friends you can get. Now, as far as priorities go, like number one priority, AI literacy. And I'll talk a little bit about this. This is teaching everyone in your organization about AI, because one of the things that, especially when you're talking about the differences with cybersecurity and AI, in cybersecurity, if we have a technology, right, that if you're securing Active Directory or things like that, normally talking to the team that, as either procured it or is in charge of working with it and deploying it enterprise wide. But AI is sort of still in this infancy of what are the business use cases. So it's being added on to all these vendors. You have all these models that people can host themselves. So in order to help people understand the risks and the things that you're talking about, if you try and dive deep into an attack against it, you need to make sure they understand what you're talking about. And so this is something that you have to continually make sure and explain, hey, here's what this term means. Here's what that term means. We'll get a little bit more into this in a second. But of course, again, another part of starting a new job is organizational politics, right? It doesn't matter whether it's a 30-person company or 30,000, 300,000, there's going to be some level of politics, and figuring out who are your stakeholders, who are the people that are power players and can sort of drive things, even if they might not look that organizationally, who are your peers, your partners. And then the big thing here when you are building this out is you need to plan a first win. And this is very similar to what we did in purple teaming as well, because you need to be successful on your first project. It's not about doing something complex. It's not about doing something impressive. It's about doing something that's a win that you can show value and build off of. And so we're going to dive into each of these a little bit more. And one of the big things that you come into this and you've heard it throughout the day, and the SANS instructors have done a fantastic job of explaining, I think, a lot of these. So none of these are going to be new terms to you, but it's one of those things that when you're not here, right, talking with a lot of other folks that are interested in AI, then inference, what does that mean? It's like, okay, that's talking with the chatbot, right? That's how people are going to understand it. Why do parameter counts matter? RAG, quantization, alignment, all of this stuff. Like you have this whole new set of acronyms and things that are either data science terms or things that have come out recently, but they're very expert focused language. And so the minute you start rattling this stuff off, people are going to tune out, right? And you need to build those bridges. You need people to invite you back to a meeting and not exclude you from it because they're like, oh, this person just wants to seem super smart, and gets to your work is only as good as your ability to communicate it. This goes across all test and evaluation and all cybersecurity, or your management. There are cases where if your management's doing the briefing, if they're good, they can help supplement any work that you do as well. But somebody has to be a good communicator. If it's not your management team, it's going to have to be you. And ideally, it's everybody. So let's talk about AI literacy. Why is this important? All right, who here in this line gets asked about AI the most? It's probably going to be everybody above me, realistically, because that's going to be the line, right, of business questions, of vendors, of all of that is like, oh, what is AI and security? Like, tell us about it. Now, all these things have happening. We outlined on the previous slide. Who has time? That's only one person really in this chain, because everyone else has multiple business units or multiple things that they're working for. And this is probably going to be very similar at every organization you're a part of. So scaling out your effort is critical. And the big thing is scaling out your expertise by, again, that AI literacy. Make everybody in your line look good because they know what They know what they're talking about, right? They're informed. They're having conversations you're never going to have. So this is the first easy win, is making your leadership look good because they're more informed about AI. So the big thing here, another set of wins. Again, this is something that's about like having a tabletop, going through and saying, oh, hey, what is the chance that we are going to have an AI incident? What does that look like? How do we respond? And this is one of those things where it's really easy for data scientists to be like, oh, hey, if this is, an algorithm or a model or something that's now off and it's not working as we thought it would, and even if it's been working well for 3 years, it's a data science problem. And so that's something that will continue to be a data science problem until we say, hey, this might actually be an adversary that is, altering the scale or the equation. And that's not something they're going to think of because they've essentially been like ignored by adversaries for a long time. Now that's not the case anymore. So that's what a key thing is in building those bridges, is like, we in cybersecurity have a lot more experience dealing with incidents, right? Ransomware has unfortunately made us all veterans of that. But that's one of those things that you've got to make sure that you need to understand how that team is going to respond and that they know to pull you in, right? That you have that experience, that you can be an ally. So again, another big difference between cybersecurity and AI is, what is that process? The data you can look at, as I mentioned earlier, because of lack of telemetry in these things, is going to be different. If you don't have access to prompt logging or API calls, things like that, that's going to be really difficult because you might trace adversary activity back to a model and then it's just nothing. And they probably did something, but you may not be able to determine what that is. So that's one of the big things here. You got to be in sync with your legal, with AI legal if you can get it, because again, AI is expensive, the expertise, especially in legal world and all that is, but that's a big thing. I'm only going to touch on this briefly, but there can be entire talks on identifying organizational politics and playing it, map out your stakeholders, make sure you know who you need to keep informed and who you need to build bridges with, is really what it comes down to. And this comes to building out a huge partner ecosystem. Again, this is going to look a little different depending on your enterprise. But if you have a different responsible AI team, you need legal, you need all those people to help you tackle all those things in AI security world that we mentioned at the beginning. And so let's see. The first win, this is a big thing. That's part of mapping all this stuff out, is figuring out where can you have good, valuable impact in your first 90 days, ideally. And so this is where sometimes it can be with the AppSec team, because of course, everyone is bolting on generative AI features to applications. It's been talked about some of the different frameworks that people are already familiar with, right? NIST, OWASP, MITRE. There are different tools and frameworks that you can use to communicate it, but the key thing is to figure out how can you line up that first win. And we're going to touch a little bit on the Atlas. This is essentially MITRE ATT&CK, but for AI systems. It's something that's continuing to be developed. So this is something I'd say check back a lot on it. And it's something that it has those cards, but the recommendations and things like that are still something that need to be updated. But this is a really good starting point if you're not really sure what are attacks on AI. This has got a bunch of really good use cases and papers that are easy to digest and sort of read through without needing a ton of expertise.
Right. Like MITRE ATT&CK, in our first reports, we started linking to them because when you show a link to something like MITRE, it kind of gives you a language, but also like, oh, this is known. This isn't like something that's theoretical, although some of the Atlas stuff is theoretical.
And I was going to say, Seth already touched on this in depth on OWASP Top 10 and also had a slide I was super jealous of from the design. So, but to sort of wrap up everything, right? It's sort of a whirlwind, like give your leadership, give your chain updates on what's happening in AI news, because it's happening every day. Literally something new is coming out every day. So scaling your impact, this is where pulling in teams like CTI, making sure that they can go and get research papers for you and that they're looking for jailbreaks and prompt injections and things like that. Threat hunting, like every talk that you've heard today, there's different impacts, and that's why AI is such a broad thing. And that's realistically a lot of times the AI red team, when you get brought in, a part of it is like, what is our AI security strategy? How can we like make sure that every part of the organization in cybersecurity is either leveraging it or understands some of the risk and the benefit around it. And that comes to internal education. This fourth one is one I really want to touch on, is matching the technology, right? Like data scientists love Jupyter notebooks. Like they talk about it like it's another programming language. You need to use Jupyter notebooks. It doesn't matter if you've used Rust your whole life, that's great. You've got to match the tech, because otherwise your findings and results they're not gonna land how you hope them to. The other thing is money, tied to money. This is one of the biggest impacts and things that in, I'll say, enterprise red teaming, sometimes people struggle with, is how do you put a dollar number on it? With AI, it's super easy. If you can pump up the number of like token counts, API calls, all of that, that is how people are charging. It's essentially it's very similar to cloud cost, because a lot of this stuff is cloud-based. And so tie that stuff directly to money. This is how to have big impact really quickly without also, don't give somebody a 9-figure bill. Like you can very easily say, all right, here's the impact we can have. So it's something to be concerned about.
Yep. So as you can see, expertise isn't all you need to build an AI red team. And with that, we'll wrap it up. A minute over. I'm sorry, Rob. It was Seth's fault.